You know that feeling when you finally escape something you've been running from your whole life? That's exactly what I thought I'd done when I bought my dream property, 3 gorgeous acres with a craftsman house 200 feet outside the Meadowbrook Estates HOA jurisdiction. I'm a middle-aged urban planner who spent 20 years watching homeowners get crushed by petty HOA tyrants, so I did my homework. Triple-checked the survey lines, confirmed with the county, made absolutely sure I was free. 48 hours after closing, I'm unpacking boxes when there's this aggressive pounding on my door. I open it to find 3 people standing there, 2 nervous-looking board members, and this woman, in the middle, perfectly styled blonde hair designer, athleisure wear, and eyes that could freeze hell over. "I'm Linda Hartwell, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA," she announces, not asks. "This property is being annexed into our association effective immediately. You have 72 hours to comply with our regulations or face daily fines." I actually laughed, showed her my survey. She didn't even glance at it. "We have emergency expansion powers," she hissed, "and if you refuse to cooperate, we'll seize you by force if we have to." That's when I knew this woman had just made the worst mistake of her life. Before I tell you how this psycho HOA president's obsession with controlling my property backfired in the most spectacular way possible, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And hey, if you love watching entitled Karens get exactly what they deserve, smash that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. Trust me. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in Linda Hartwell's crosshairs. Like I said, I've worked in urban planning for 2 decades. My job involves reviewing development proposals, zoning applications, and yes, HOA covenants. I've seen it all. The HOA that fined a guy $2,000 because his mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. The one that forced a veteran to take down his flagpole. The board that sued a widow because her rose bushes were 3 inches too tall. Horror stories that would make your blood boil. So when my wife and I started house hunting last year, I had one non-negotiable requirement: no HOA, 0. I'd rather live in a shack in the woods than submit to some power-drunk suburban dictator who thinks they're running a miniature kingdom. That's when I found the property. 3 acres of pure perfection mature oak trees, a babbling creek running through the back corner, and this beautiful 1,920 seconds craftsman house with original hardwood floors and a wraparound porch. The kind of place you dream about. But here's what made it absolutely perfect. It sat exactly 207 feet beyond the boundary line of Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Meadowbrook Estates is one of those cookie-cutter suburban developments that sprouted up about 15 years ago. 150 identical houses, all beige or gray, all with the exact same landscaping packages. The kind of neighborhood where every mailbox matches every lawn, is precisely 2.5 inches tall, and God help you if you park your car on the street overnight. Their CC and Rs, that's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, ran 47 pages. 47 pages of rules about what color you could paint your shutters, what kind of outdoor furniture was acceptable, what breeds of dogs were allowed, even what time you could put your trash cans out. And presiding over this suburban dystopia was Linda Hartwell. She'd been HOA president for 8 years. 8 years of increasingly aggressive enforcement. I'd heard about her even before I found the property. In urban planning circles, certain HOA presidents develop reputations, and Linda's reputation was legendary. She'd filed over 300 violation notices in the past year alone. She'd taken 12 homeowners to small claims court. She'd even called the police on a 10-year-old's lemonade stand for operating an unpermitted business in a residential zone. But none of that was my problem, because my property wasn't in her jurisdiction. I made absolutely certain of that. I hired a licensed surveyor who confirmed the boundary lines. I pulled records from the county recorder's office showing the exact legal description of the HOA's territory. I had my real estate attorney review every single document 3 times. My property deed had 0, and I mean 0 HOA covenants attached to it. I was free. The day I closed on the house, I felt like a prisoner who'd just been released after 20 years. I could park my RV in my own driveway. I could build a workshop. I could paint my front door neon orange if I wanted to. Not that I would, but the point is I could. Freedom. Real, genuine freedom. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. During the house hunting process, I'd noticed Linda a few times. She lived in a house right on the edge of the development, directly across the street from my property. I'd catch her watching whenever I came by to measure for furniture or plan renovations. Just standing in her window, arms crossed, staring. It was unsettling, but I figured she was just nosy. Moving day was a Saturday in late March. Beautiful spring weather, perfect for hauling boxes and furniture. My wife Sarah and I were thrilled. Our teenage son Mike was less thrilled about leaving his friends, but even he had to admit the property was pretty awesome. We spent that first day unpacking essentials, exploring the land, making plans. I wanted to build a deck overlooking the creek. Sarah wanted to restore the original garden beds. Mike immediately claimed the detached garage for a gaming setup. That first night, we sat on the porch with pizza and beer watching the sunset through the oak trees. We actually did it, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. We escaped. Famous last words. Because less than 48 hours later, Linda Hartwell was standing at my door with her proclamation of annexation, and I realized my escape had just become a war. When Linda Hartwell showed up that Monday morning, I was in my garage organizing tools. I heard the aggressive knock and found 3 people on my porch, Linda in the center, flanked by a nervous-looking guy in his 60s and a woman in her 50s who seemed like she'd rather be anywhere else. "I'm Linda Hartwell, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA," she announced with the authority of someone who thinks they're addressing a subordinate. "These are board members, Rick Patterson and Patricia Chen. We're here to inform you that this property is being annexed into Meadowbrook Estates effective immediately." I blinked at her. "Excuse me," she thrust a folder at me. "This is your official annexation notice. The board has voted unanimously to expand our boundaries to include your property. You'll need to submit all required documentation, pay the initiation fee of $1,500, and bring your property into compliance with our architectural standards within 72 hours. I actually laughed out loud. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This property isn't in your HOA. It's not even within your boundaries." "The boundaries have been expanded," Linda said flatly. "That's not how property law works," I replied, still trying to keep it friendly. I went inside, grabbed my survey documents and deed, and brought them out. "Look, here's the certified survey from last month. The Meadowbrook Estates boundary is right here." I pointed to the line on the map, and my property line starts here 200 feet beyond it. "And here's my deed, which has 0 HOA covenants attached." I researched this extensively before buying, specifically because I didn't want to be in an HOA. Linda barely glanced at the documents. "Those are outdated. The board has exercised our emergency expansion powers under Section 47B of our governing documents. We have the authority to annex adjacent properties that impact community aesthetics and property values." I stared at her. "That's not a thing. HOAs can't just annex random properties. That would require property owner consent, title changes, county approval." "Are you an attorney?" Linda interrupted. "No, but I'm an urban planner with 20 years of experience, and "Then you're not qualified to interpret HOA law," she said, with a smug smile. "I've consulted with our legal team and we're well within our rights. Now let's discuss the immediate violations." She pulled out a clipboard. "First, that fence." She pointed to my split-rail fence along the front of the property. "The stain color is non-compliant. Approved colors are listed in the architectural guidelines. Second, that shed. My small garden shed barely visible behind the house. Structures require pre-approval. Third, that vehicle. My RV parked in my driveway. Recreational vehicles are prohibited from being visible from the street. Each violation carries a fine of $500 per day until corrected." "That's $1,500 a day," I said incredulously. "For violations of rules that don't apply to me because I'm not in your HOA? Payment is due by Friday," Linda continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Failure to pay will result in additional late fees and potential legal action, including liens against your property." Rick and Patricia looked increasingly uncomfortable. Rick cleared his throat. "Linda, maybe we should. The board has spoken." Linda cut him off. She turned back to me. "I'll be conducting a full property inspection later this week to document additional violations. Make sure you're available to provide access. You are not coming onto my property," I said firmly. "This entire conversation is absurd. You have 0 authority over this land. 0. It's not in your HOA, and that's not going to change because you wrote up some fake annexation document." Linda's face flushed red. Her voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "Mr. Morrison, I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. In that time, I've dealt with dozens of people like you, people who think rules don't apply to them, who think they can do whatever they want without consequences. Every single one of them learned otherwise. Your property sits adjacent to our community, which means it impacts our property values and quality of life. We have ways of dealing with people like you." She leaned in closer. "I'm giving you 72 hours to comply voluntarily. After that, we'll take more aggressive action, and let me be very clear, we'll seize you by force if we have to. Your choice is whether this happens the easy way or the hard way. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Rick and Patricia scrambling to follow. Rick shot me an apologetic look over his shoulder. Patricia just looked terrified. I stood there on my porch folder, full of fake violations in hand, trying to process what had just happened. A HOA president had just threatened to seize my property that wasn't even in her HOA by force. It was so insane I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But I hadn't imagined it. And that's when I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. First to my real estate attorney, Jason Brenner. Second to a friend of mine who's a property rights expert. Third to my security camera company to order a complete system for my property. Because if there's one thing I learned in 20 years of urban planning, it's this: people like Linda Hartwell don't back down on their own. They escalate. And if she was willing to make illegal threats on day one, I needed to document everything that was coming. Jason confirmed what I already knew. Linda had 0 legal authority to annex my property. 0. The idea was laughable, but he also warned me that she could make my life miserable through harassment, and that I should start documenting everything immediately. I spent the rest of that day installing security cameras, downloading a call recording app, and creating a detailed log with timestamps. I photographed the violation notices Linda had left. I saved the annexation document she'd given me. I made copies of everything. Linda Hartwell had fired the first shot in a war she didn't realize she was about to lose. Because she just threatened the wrong person, someone who actually understood property law, who knew how to document harassment, and who was absolutely not going to let some suburban dictator steamroll him. The question wasn't whether I was going to fight back. The question was how hard Linda was going to fall when I did. The violation notices started the next morning. I walked out to get my newspaper and found a bright orange citation zip-tied to my mailbox. Violation, unapproved mailbox decoration. Fine $250. Compliance required within 24 hours. My mailbox decoration was a simple wreath my wife had hung up. On our mailbox, on our property, 200 feet outside their boundaries. That same day I found 3 more citations. 1 on my fence, unapproved structure color. 1 on my RV, prohibited vehicle storage. 1 tucked under my doormat, lawn maintenance below community standards. My lawn looked fine, better than fine actually. But apparently it wasn't exactly 2.5 inches tall like the HOA required, so Linda had added it to her list of imaginary violations. Day 3, I got a call from the County Code Enforcement Office. An inspector named Dave Rodriguez. Mr. Morrison, I've received a complaint about your property from a Linda Hartwell. She's claiming you have unpermitted structures, illegal drainage modifications, and possible septic violations. I need to come do an inspection. I bit back my frustration. Dave, all my structures are permitted. I've got the documentation. This is harassment from someone trying to claim my property is in her HOA when it's not. Dave sighed. Yeah, I kind of figured. Miss Hartwell calls us a lot. But I still have to follow up on complaints. Can I come by this afternoon? Dave showed up at 3. I walked him through the property, showed him my permits for the shed, explained that my septic system was inspected during the sale and passed with flying colors. He checked everything, took some notes, and shook his head. Mr. Morrison, everything here is fine. More than fine. You've got your paperwork in better order than 90% of properties I inspect. I'll close these complaints as unfounded. He hesitated. Between you and me, document everything with Miss Hartwell. She's filed maybe 200 complaints in the past 3 years, and maybe 10 of them were legitimate. The rest were just harassment. She goes after people she doesn't like. Why doesn't someone stop her? I asked. Dave shrugged. HOA presidents are elected by their communities. Unless the homeowners vote her out, there's not much we can do, except waste county resources, investigating her bogus complaints. Which I'm sure she'd love taxpayers funding her vendetta. That night, things escalated. I was grilling dinner around 7 when a police car pulled up. An officer in his 30s got out looking apologetic before he even reached me. Evening, sir. I'm Officer Mike Chen. I got a call about a trespassing situation at this address. Trespassing? I looked around my empty property. There's nobody here except my family. Officer Chen nodded slowly. The caller said a suspicious man was on the property without permission, acting aggressively. The description she gave matches you, and this is the address she provided. He paused. Let me guess, Linda Hartwell. You know her. Everyone in the department knows her, Chen said wearily. She calls us 2-3 times a week. Last month, she reported a gang gathering that turned out to be 4 teenagers playing basketball. Before that, she called about a domestic disturbance that was actually a couple having a backyard birthday party. He pulled out his notepad. For the record, I need to confirm you live here. This is your property and there's no trespassing situation. That's correct. I'm the homeowner standing in my own backyard grilling burgers. Officer Chen wrote something down. Great. I'll mark this as unfounded. Sir, I'd recommend you consider documenting these interactions. If Miss Hartwell continues making false police reports, there could be grounds for a harassment complaint. He handed me his card. Give me a call if she keeps this up. And enjoy your dinner. By the end of week 2, I'd received 17 violation notices, 3 county inspector visits, and 5 police calls. Linda was throwing everything at me, hoping something would stick. But every single complaint was dismissed. Every violation notice went straight into my documentation file, and my attorney started drafting a cease and desist letter. Then things got weirder. My neighbor from the other side, Jim, stopped by one Saturday. Hey, Tom, I wanted to give you a heads up. Linda's been going around talking about you. What's she saying? Jim looked uncomfortable. She's telling people in Meadowbrook Estates that you're a troublemaker, that your property is causing everyone's home values to drop because you're not maintaining it to community standards. She said you're running some kind of unlicensed business, that you've got junk cars all over, that you're attracting rodents. He gestured at my pristine property. Obviously none of that's true, but she's stirring people up. There's an emergency HOA meeting next Thursday, specifically about the threat outside our borders. Her words. An HOA meeting about me. This was getting ridiculous. I'm not even in their HOA. I know, man. It's crazy. But Linda's got most of the neighborhood scared of her. She comes down hard on anyone who questions her, so people just go along. Jim hesitated. Look, I'm in that HOA and I hate it. Most of us do. But nobody wants to be her next target, you know. An idea occurred to me. Jim, is that meeting open to non-residents? Technically, they're open meetings, yeah. Why? Because I think I'd like to attend, I said. Seems only fair since I'm apparently the main topic of discussion. Jim grinned. Oh man, Linda's going to lose her mind. Thursday evening, I walked into the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center. The room was set up with about 80 chairs facing a long table where Linda sat with Rick, Patricia, and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Most of the chairs were filled with residents who looked varying degrees of nervous and annoyed, the standard expression of people trapped in HOA meetings. Linda was mid-sentence when she noticed me walk in. And that's why we need to authorize the board to take stronger action against. She stopped dead, staring at me. Excuse me, this is a private HOA meeting for residents only. Actually, I said pleasantly, taking a seat in the back row, HOA meetings in this state are required to be open to the public unless you're in executive session discussing legal or personnel matters. I looked it up. I'm just here to observe. Linda's face went from pale to bright red. This is highly irregular. So is holding a meeting about someone who isn't in your HOA, I countered. But here we are. For the next 30 minutes, I watched Linda deliver a presentation that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so disturbing. She had actual slides. PowerPoint slides with photos of my property that she'd apparently taken while trespassing. She claimed my unkempt property was lowering property values for the entire community and represented a significant quality of life threat. She showed a picture of my RV and called it commercial vehicle blight. She showed my garden shed and claimed it was unpermitted construction that violates county codes, a lie, since Dave Rodriguez had inspected and approved it. She even claimed my property was attracting vermin and creating drainage problems, neither of which had any basis in reality. This is why Linda concluded the board is requesting authorization to pursue all available legal remedies, including enforcement of our expanded boundaries, and if necessary, placing liens on the property to recover unpaid fines. There was uncomfortable murmuring from the crowd. Then, an elderly gentleman in the front row raised his hand. Linda, I have a question. Linda's smile looked forced. Yes, George, how exactly can we enforce boundaries on property that isn't in our HOA? I've lived here since the development was built, and that property has never been part of Meadowbrook Estates. The boundary line runs along Oak Street. Everyone knows that. The board has expanded the boundaries, Linda said tightly. But don't property owners have to consent to that, George pressed. And doesn't it have to be filed with the county? I don't remember any paperwork about boundary expansions. The board has authority under emergency provisions. Show me where in the CC&Rs it says that, George interrupted. Because I've read them cover to cover, and I don't recall any provision allowing involuntary annexation of external properties. Linda's face was now dark red. George, you're out of order. I'm asking legitimate questions, George said firmly. And I think a lot of us would like answers before we authorize legal action that could expose the HOA to liability. Several other residents nodded. Linda looked like she was about to explode. That's when I stood up. "If I may," I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. "My name is Tom Morrison. I'm the property owner Miss Hartwell has been discussing. I'm an urban planner with 20 years of experience, and I can answer some of these questions." "Sit down," Linda snapped. "You have no right to." "Actually, in an open HOA meeting, any attendee can speak during homeowner comment periods," I said calmly. "That's in your bylaws." I read them too. For the next 10 minutes, I explained the actual legal reality. I showed on my phone the survey documents proving my property was outside their boundaries. I explained that HOAs cannot involuntarily annex external properties, that doing so would require property owner consent title changes and county approval. I explained that all of Linda's violation notices were legally meaningless because she had zero authority over my land. "Every complaint she's filed with the county has been investigated and dismissed," I said. "Every violation notice she's left on my property is based on rules that don't apply to me. And frankly, her behavior over the past 2 weeks constitutes harassment. My attorney is preparing a cease and desist letter, and if it continues, I'll be filing for a restraining order and pursuing a civil harassment lawsuit." The room was dead silent. Then George started clapping. A few others joined in. Linda stood up, shaking with rage. "This meeting is over. Everyone out now." "Linda, we haven't voted on," Rick started. "I said out," Linda screamed. She pointed at me. "You? Get off HOA property immediately, or I'm calling the police." "For what?" I asked calmly. "Attending a public meeting, Rick, escort him out," Linda demanded. Rick didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The residents started filing out, many of them looking at Linda with obvious distaste. George approached me as I left. "That took guts," he said quietly. "Linda's going to come at you even harder now." "Let her," I said. "I'm documenting everything." George glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Can we talk sometime privately? There's some things you should know about Linda, things that might help your case." "Absolutely," I said, handing him my card. "Call me anytime." As I walked to my car, I could hear Linda inside the community center screaming at the remaining board members. I didn't know it yet, but George's information was about to blow this situation wide open and turn Linda's attack on me into the beginning of her own downfall. George called me 2 days after the HOA meeting. "Can you meet for coffee? Somewhere not in the neighborhood? I don't want Linda seeing us together." We met at a Starbucks 3 miles away. George was in his 70s, retired aerospace engineer, one of the original homeowners, when Meadowbrook Estates was first built 15 years ago. He showed up with a thick manila folder under his arm. "I've been waiting for someone like you," he said once we had our coffee. "Someone Linda couldn't intimidate. Someone who'd actually fight back." "What's in the folder?" I asked. George opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, highlighted financial statements, and photocopies of invoices. Evidence that Linda's been embezzling from the HOA for at least 3 years, maybe longer. I felt my eyebrows shoot up. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." George spread out the documents. "I was HOA treasurer until 2 years ago. Linda forced me out because I started asking questions about discrepancies in the budget. Look at this." He pointed to a series of invoices. "These are payments to Hartwell Property Services for landscaping maintenance. Notice the amounts." I scanned the numbers. "These are high, really high." Hartwell Property Services is owned by Linda's husband, Brad, George explained. "They've had the contract for 8 years, the entire time Linda's been president. And the costs have been increasing steadily. We're now paying 3 times the market rate for basic lawn care." He pulled out another sheet. "I got quotes from 3 other landscaping companies last year. All of them came in 30 to 40% lower than what we're paying Brad's company." "Did you present this to the board?" I asked. I tried. Linda shut me down, said I was creating division and questioning her integrity. 2 weeks later, there was a special board meeting where they voted me out as treasurer and replaced me with Patricia, who does whatever Linda tells her to do. George's expression was bitter. "Most of the homeowners don't pay attention to the finances. They just pay their dues and trust the board. The ones who do ask questions get targeted with harassment until they back down." I studied the documents more closely. The pattern was clear: inflated contracts with companies owned by Linda's family, mysterious administrative fees that had no detailed breakdown, expenses that seemed wildly out of proportion to what they should cost. "How much are we talking about total?" I asked. "Conservative estimate $87,000 over the past 3 years, George said. "Could be more, but that's what I can document with these invoices alone." I let out a low whistle. "George, this is criminal fraud. Have you gone to the police?" He shook his head. "I'm scared to." Linda's ruthless. After she forced me out as treasurer, she started filing violations against my property, stupid stuff like my lawn being a quarter-inch too long or my fence having a scratch on it. My wife has health problems, and the stress was killing her. I backed off because I didn't want to make things worse. He looked at me intently. But when I saw you stand up to her at that meeting, I thought maybe together we could actually do something. Why is she going after my property so aggressively? I asked. I mean, I get that she's a control freak, but the level of obsession seems extreme even for her. George pulled out a map of the neighborhood. Look at this. Your property has this creek running through it, right? That creek is the headwater for the drainage system that runs through Meadowbrook Estates. Linda's been trying to get control of that creek access for years because she wants to build a dam and create a retention pond, which would supposedly increase property values and not coincidentally require a massive construction contract that would go to her husband's company. He tapped my property on the map. She's tried to buy your property twice before from the previous owners. They refused to sell. She's furious that someone else bought it, especially someone who isn't going to cave to her pressure. Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't just about control for control's sake. Linda had a financial incentive to force me into her HOA or drive me away so she could acquire the property. The creek access was worth tens of thousands of dollars in potential construction contracts. Okay, I said, here's what we're going to do. First, I need you to give me copies of all this documentation. My attorney needs to see it. Second, do you know any other homeowners who are unhappy with Linda? George laughed. About 40 families that I know of. Maybe more. People are terrified of her, but they hate her. Can you quietly reach out to some of them? Don't organize anything formal yet. Just feel out how many would be willing to vote Linda out if it came to a special election. I can do that, George said. Good. Meanwhile, I'm going to let Linda keep digging her hole deeper. My attorney is filing a harassment restraining order this week. Every time she comes onto my property, every fake violation notice, every bogus complaint, it all goes into building our case. And if she's embezzling HOA funds, we're going to expose that too. George's face lit up with hope for the first time since we'd started talking. You really think we can take her down? I don't think it, I said. I know it. Linda made a huge mistake when she came after me. She picked a fight with someone who understands property law and isn't afraid to use it. And now that I know she's corrupt, I'm not just defending my property anymore, I'm going after her. Over the next 3 weeks, Linda continued her harassment campaign, completely unaware that she was building my case for me. She had construction equipment accidentally block my driveway twice. Both times I called the police, who documented it as harassment. She filed more bogus code complaints, each one investigated and dismissed, with the county inspectors getting increasingly annoyed at the waste of their time. She even walked onto my property one Saturday morning, clipboard in hand, to conduct her required inspection. I had it all on video, her trespassing on clearly posted private property, her demanding access to my shed, and how's her reaction when I told her to leave immediately. This is HOA property under the annexation order, she insisted on camera. This is private property, you have no authority here, and you're trespassing, I replied calmly. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. You don't intimidate me, Linda said, but she left. And I had crystal clear video of the entire interaction, complete with her admitting on camera that she believed she had authority over property that legally wasn't in her HOA. My attorney Jason was practically gleeful when I showed him the footage. This is gold. She's admitting to harassment on video. Combined with the police reports, the documented fake violations, and George's financial evidence, we've got a case that could result in criminal charges. What about the embezzlement? I asked. That's more complicated, Jason admitted. We'd need to go through proper channels, present the evidence to the HOA board first, give them a chance to address it internally. If they don't, then we can take it to law enforcement. But the harassment case, we can file that right now. Do it, I said. The harassment restraining order was filed the next week. Linda was served with papers ordering her to stay at least 100 feet from me, my family, and my property, and to cease all contact except through attorneys. She was also informed that I was pursuing civil damages for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. According to George, Linda's reaction was nuclear. She threw the papers at the process, server screamed that this was a conspiracy, and vowed that she'd destroy me even if it took everything she had. Good, I told George. Let her keep escalating. Every action she takes just adds to the damages. But George was worried. Tom, you don't understand how obsessed she is. She's not going to back down. She's going to do something crazy. I'm counting on it, I said, because when she does, that's when we've got her. I had no idea how right George was about Linda doing something crazy, or how spectacular her final meltdown was going to be. The restraining order should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have backed off, consulted an attorney, accepted defeat. But Linda Hartwell wasn't reasonable, she was obsessed. And obsessed people don't back down. They escalate until they self-destruct. For about a week after being served, Linda stayed away from my property, but I could feel the storm building. George reported that she'd become increasingly erratic at HOA meetings, ranting about conspiracies and persecution. She'd started accusing random homeowners of being in league with me. Several families were quietly talking about selling their homes just to escape her reign of terror. Then in early June, I made the mistake of starting construction on my deck. Not a mistake legally, I had all the proper permits from the county professional contractors, the works. But to Linda, it was the ultimate provocation. Here I was doing exactly what I'd bought the property to do, making improvements without asking permission from her HOA, and she couldn't stand it. The construction crew started on a Monday morning. We'd poured the concrete footings the week before, and now we were framing the deck structure. It was going to be beautiful, 20 by 30 feet wrapping around the back of the house overlooking the creek. Everything I dreamed about. I was out there with the contractors around 10 in the morning reviewing the plans when I heard shouting. I turned to see Linda marching across my property in direct violation of the restraining order, followed by 6 people. I recognized Rick and Patricia from the board, plus 3 other residents I'd seen at HOA meetings, and a young guy in his 20s who looked vaguely familiar. "Stop this construction immediately," Linda shouted. She was shaking with rage face, flushed eyes wild. "You do not have authorization from the HOA Architectural Review Committee." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Linda, you're in violation of a restraining order. You need to leave my property now." "This isn't your property," she hissed. "This is HOA territory under the expansion resolution, and you are in violation of multiple." "Ma'am," one of my contractors interrupted, "you need to leave. This is a permitted job site, and you're interfering with legal construction." "I'm not going anywhere," Linda said. She turned to the young guy. "Brandon, document everything. Photos and video. We'll need evidence for the lawsuit." Brandon, who I later learned was Linda's nephew, pulled out his phone and started filming the construction. "Linda," Rick said nervously, "maybe we should call our attorney first." "I don't need an attorney to enforce HOA rules," Linda snapped. She turned to me. "You have exactly 60 seconds to halt this construction and remove your contractors from the property, or I'm assessing emergency fines of $5,000 effective immediately." "You have no authority to do any of that," I said calmly, still recording. "My property is not in your HOA. I have all required permits from the county, and you are currently trespassing and violating a restraining order. Your permits are invalid because you didn't get HOA approval," Linda shouted. "That's what Section 23 of the CC and Rs requires. For properties in the HOA," I said, "which mine isn't." That's when Linda made her first big mistake of the day. She marched over to the construction materials stacked near the house and started trying to knock over a pile of lumber. She was screaming about illegal construction and unpermitted structures while physically attacking my building materials. "Linda, stop," Patricia gasped. "You can't," but Linda was beyond reasoning. She managed to topple one stack of 2x6s, which crashed to the ground with a huge bang. Then she grabbed a bucket of screws and threw it, sending hardware scattering everywhere. My contractors stood there in shock. I kept recording, making sure I had clear footage of everything: Linda trespassing, Linda destroying property, the date and time, stamp everything. "Somebody call the police," I said quietly to my head contractor, Dave. He nodded and stepped away with his phone. Linda seemed to suddenly realize what she'd done. She stepped back, breathing hard, looking at the mess she'd created. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Fine. You want to play hardball. The HOA is prepared to pursue every legal remedy available. We will take liens against this property. We will sue for damages to community property values. We will." That's when the county inspector's truck pulled up. Dave Rodriguez stepped out looking annoyed. "Miss Hartwell, I should have known." "Dave, thank God," Linda said, immediately switching to a sweet tone. "This man is conducting unpermitted construction. I've been trying to explain to him that he needs to stop until he gets proper authorization, but Miss Hartwell," Dave interrupted, "I personally inspected this property and reviewed these permits last week. The construction is completely legal and properly permitted." He turned to me. "Tom, are you okay?" "I'm fine, but she just destroyed a pile of lumber and a bucket of hardware," I said. "I've got it on video." Dave's expression hardened. "Ma'am, did you damage property on this construction site I was attempting to prevent illegal?" "It's not illegal," Dave said flatly. "I'm the county inspector. I approved it. And unless you're a licensed contractor or county official, you have no business on this job site." He pulled out his own phone. I'm going to need to call the police to file a report about the property destruction. Linda's face went from red to pale. You can't do that. I'm the HOA president. I have authority. You have no authority over county permits or private property, Dave said. And from what I can see, you're also violating a restraining order by being here. 2 police cars pulled up Officer Chen, who'd responded to Linda's fake calls before, and another officer I didn't know. Officer Chen took one look at the situation and sighed. Miss Hartwell, we need to talk. What followed was almost surreal. Linda tried to convince the officers that she had legal authority to be on my property and stop the construction. She showed them her fake annexation documents. She claimed I was the one violating the restraining order by harassing the HOA with illegal construction. She even tried to claim that Dave Rodriguez, a county inspector, was part of a conspiracy against her. Officer Chen listened patiently, then said, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for violating a restraining order, trespassing, and destruction of property. You can't arrest me," Linda shrieked. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent," Officer Chen said, pulling out handcuffs. "I suggest you use it." Linda's arrest was spectacular. She screamed about persecution and conspiracy theories while being handcuffed. She demanded that Rick and Patricia do something. She threatened to sue the police department, the county, and me personally. Rick and Patricia just stood there looking mortified. Brandon stopped filming and quietly slipped away. The other HOA residents who'd come with her backed away like they'd never been involved. As Officer Chen led Linda to the patrol car, she turned back to me and screamed, "This isn't over. The HOA has authorized legal action by any means necessary. We will enforce community standards, even if we have to seize you by force." Officer Chen stopped walking. "Ma'am, did you just threaten this man?" "I'm stating official HOA policy," Linda said, apparently not realizing how insane she sounded. "That's a terroristic threat," Officer Chen said. "We're adding that to the charges." I watched them drive away with Linda still screaming in the back seat. Dave Rodriguez shook his head. "I've been doing this job for 12 years. That's the worst meltdown I've ever seen." "Will she be okay?" Patricia asked quietly. She looked shaken. "That depends on whether she gets some professional help," I said. "But legally, she's in serious trouble." Rick approached me. "Mr. Morrison, on behalf of the board, I am so sorry. We never should have let things get this far." Linda kept insisting she was right, and we just went along because it was easier than fighting her. "I understand," I said, "but this has to stop. All of it. The fake violations, the harassment, all of it. It will," Rick promised. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting tonight. We're removing Linda as president and retaining our own attorney to sort this mess out." That evening, while Linda was still at the police station, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board held their emergency meeting. George attended and gave me a full report afterward. The board voted unanimously to remove Linda as president effective immediately. They also voted to send me a formal apology letter and acknowledge that my property was not and had never been part of the HOA. Rick was appointed interim president. But the real bombshell came when George presented his financial evidence to the board. Once Linda wasn't there to shut him down, he showed them everything: the inflated contracts, the embezzlement, the padded expenses. Patricia, who'd been signing checks without really looking at them, went pale when she realized what she'd been approving. "We have to report this," Rick said quietly. "This is criminal." The board voted to turn George's evidence over to both the police and the state HOA regulatory board. They also voted to demand full restitution from Linda and to terminate all contracts with her husband's company. Linda was released from jail after posting bail that night. According to neighbors, she came home and lost it, completely screaming at her husband, throwing things, ranting about conspiracies and persecution. Within hours, George texted me, "She knows about the financial investigation. This is about to get very ugly." He was right, but ugly for Linda meant vindication for everyone she'd terrorized. And the uglier it got for her, the sweeter the justice became. The criminal charges against Linda moved fast, probably because she'd committed her crimes in front of multiple witnesses and on video. But it was the financial investigation that really destroyed her. Once the HOA board authorized a full forensic audit, the whole house of cards collapsed. The emergency HOA meeting where George presented his evidence was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood that something big was happening, and nearly every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates showed up. I attended as a guest of George, sitting in the back to watch the show. Rick, as interim president, opened the meeting. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have some serious matters to discuss regarding the former board president and the HOA's finances." He gestured to George. "George Chen, our former treasurer, has brought forward evidence of significant financial misconduct. George, George, stood and walked to the front. He'd prepared a presentation, nothing fancy, just clear slides showing the numbers. But the numbers told a devastating story. Over 3 years, Linda had systematically embezzled an estimated $87,000 through various schemes. Inflated contracts with her husband's company, fake vendor invoices for work that was never done, administrative fees that went straight into her pocket, equipment purchases that never showed up on HOA property. The room was dead silent as George clicked through slide after slide. You could see faces going from confused to shocked to angry as the scope of Linda's fraud became clear. "Wait," someone called out. "Are you saying Linda stole our HOA dues?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," George replied. "Every homeowner in this room has been paying approximately $500 more per year than necessary because Linda was padding the budget to cover her embezzlement." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding to know how this happened, why nobody caught it sooner. Rick had to bang his gavel to restore order. "We've already reported this to the police," Rick said. "There will be a criminal investigation. We've also retained an attorney who specializes in HOA fraud cases. But we wanted you all to know the truth because you deserve to know where your money went." "What about all the harassment?" an elderly woman asked. "Linda's been terrorizing people for years over tiny violations. Was that all just cover for the stealing?" "Partially," George said. "But I think it was also about control. Linda used fear to keep people from questioning her. Anyone who challenged her got targeted with violations and harassment until they backed down. It created an environment where she could operate without oversight." Someone else called out, "What about that guy she went after? The one whose property she said was in the HOA?" All eyes turned to me. I raised my hand sheepishly. "That would be me, Tom Morrison." "Is it true she tried to annex your property illegally?" a man asked. "That's true," I confirmed. "My property is about 200 feet outside the HOA boundaries. Always has been." Linda tried to claim she'd expanded the boundaries to include me, but that was completely fabricated. She wanted control of my property because it has creek access that would have allowed her husband's company to get a lucrative contract building a retention pond. "So she tried to steal your property to steal more money from us," someone said flatly. "Essentially, yes." "Mr. Morrison," Rick said, "I want to formally apologize on behalf of the board for everything Linda put you through. We should have stepped in sooner. We should have questioned her actions. We failed in our duties as board members and we're deeply sorry." The room actually applauded. Several homeowners came up afterward to apologize personally and thank me for standing up to Linda when they couldn't. But the most significant moment came when one homeowner stood up and said, "I move that we vote to permanently ban Linda Hartwell from ever serving in HOA leadership again, and that we pursue full legal action to recover every penny she stole." "Second," said at least 5 people simultaneously. The vote was 89 in favor, 12, opposed, 3 abstentions. Linda's reign of terror was officially over. The criminal case moved through the system over the next 3 months. Linda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor had her dead to rights. The video of her destroying my property, the restraining order violation, the terroristic threat, and worst of all, the financial evidence. There was no way to explain away $87,000 in fraudulent transactions. Meanwhile, I filed my civil lawsuit: harassment, defamation, trespassing, intentional infliction of emotional distress. My attorney added up all the time I'd spent dealing with Linda's false complaints, all the stress on my family, the attempted damage to my reputation, and submitted a demand for $45,000 in damages. Linda's attorney tried to claim I was overreacting, that it was all just a misunderstanding between neighbors. But then we presented the evidence: 17 fake violation notices, 8 bogus code enforcement complaints, 5 false police reports, multiple documented instances of trespassing, the video of her destroying my construction materials, the restraining order she violated, and her own words on video claiming she had authority to seize my property by force. The judge was not impressed. During the hearing, he actually interrupted Linda's attorney and said, "Counsel, your client engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against someone who had never done anything wrong except refuse to be bullied. The evidence is overwhelming. I suggest you seriously consider settling this case." They settled 2 weeks later. Linda agreed to pay $45,000 in damages, issue a formal written apology, and accept a permanent restraining order requiring her to stay 500 feet away from me and my property at all times. The criminal case went even worse for her. The prosecutor offered a plea deal: plead guilty to embezzlement and fraud, pay full restitution to the HOA, accept 5 years of probation, and perform 500 hours of community service. The alternative was going to trial, and potentially facing 5 to 10 years in prison. Linda took the deal. At the sentencing hearing, the judge gave her a stern lecture about abuse of authority and betrayal of trust. Miss Hartwell, you were entrusted with managing your community's resources, and instead you stole from your neighbors. You harassed anyone who questioned you. You filed false reports with police and county agencies, wasting public resources. And when someone finally stood up to you, you escalated to criminal behavior. You are fortunate that the prosecutor offered this deal because, frankly, I think prison time would have been appropriate. Linda had to stand there and take it. The woman who'd screamed at me about HOA authority and threatened to seize my property by force now stood silent, broken, accepting her sentence. But the justice didn't stop there. The fallout for Linda was complete and total. Her husband's company, Hartwell Property Services, immediately lost all HOA contracts, not just with Meadowbrook Estates, but with 3 other communities they serviced. Word spread fast in the industry about the fraud, and within 2 months, Brad Hartwell's business was bankrupt. The HOA filed a separate civil suit to recover the embezzled funds. Linda and her husband were jointly liable since his company had been the recipient of much of the fraudulent money. The court ordered them to repay the full $87,000 plus interest and legal fees, bringing the total to over $105,000. They couldn't pay it. Their house went into foreclosure. The beautiful home right on the edge of Meadowbrook Estates, where Linda had stood in the window watching my property with such obsession, was now being seized by the bank. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who'd threatened to seize my property by force was now having her own home seized by legitimate legal processes. Meanwhile, back at Meadowbrook Estates, the transformation was remarkable. George was elected as the new HOA president in a landslide. His first actions were to slash unnecessary expenses, renegotiate all vendor contracts at fair market rates, and refund homeowners for the excess fees they'd been paying. Every family got approximately $1,500 back, money that Linda had been skimming through her padded budgets. The second thing George did was revise the CC&Rs to add accountability measures. No single board member could approve contracts over a certain amount without full board vote. The treasurer had to provide quarterly financial reports to all homeowners. Any homeowner could request an independent audit. And harassment of residents, the kind Linda had perfected, was explicitly banned with automatic removal from the board as the penalty. But the sweetest moment came about 6 weeks after Linda's sentencing. George approached me with a request. Tom, the board would like to hire you as a consultant. We need to review our community infrastructure and plan some long overdue improvements. Given your background in urban planning, you'd be perfect for the job. And we'd pay you a fair rate, of course. I accepted. The woman who'd tried to force me into her HOA so she could control my property and steal more money was now gone, and I was being invited to help the community as an equal partner, paid fairly for my expertise with no coercion, no threats, just mutual respect. I helped Meadowbrook Estates identify several cost-effective infrastructure improvements. We did update the drainage system using my creek access, which I granted them an easement for at a reasonable rate. But instead of Brad Hartwell's overpriced company, we hired a reputable contractor who did the work for 40% less. The community got a better drainage system, I got paid fairly for the easement, and everyone benefited except the Hartwells. The state HOA regulatory board also took action. Based on the evidence, they added Linda Hartwell to a state registry of banned HOA board members. She was now legally prohibited from serving on any HOA board in the state for 10 years. Her reign of terror couldn't simply move to another community. She was done. The defamation lawsuit I'd filed also settled in my favor. As part of the settlement, Linda had to send a letter to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates, formally retracting all the false statements she'd made about me and acknowledging that I had never violated any laws or caused any problems. She had to admit publicly that her claims about my property causing decreased property values, attracting vermin, and violating codes were all false. Reading that apology letter forced from the woman who'd screamed that she'd seize me by force was incredibly satisfying. It was photocopied and mailed to 150 households. Everyone knew the truth now. Everyone knew that Linda had been the problem, not me or anyone else she'd targeted. About 3 months after the criminal sentencing, I was working on my completed deck one Saturday afternoon when I saw Linda's car drive slowly past my property. She was leaving the neighborhood the foreclosure had finalized, and this was apparently her last day. I was having a barbecue, and about 15 of my neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates were there. George and his wife, Rick and his family, even Patricia, who'd apologized profusely for enabling Linda's behavior. Linda's car slowed to a crawl as she passed. I watched her looking at the scene, my beautiful property, my completed deck, my RV proudly parked in my driveway, my garden shed standing exactly where I'd put it. And all these people, her former subjects, laughing and celebrating with the man she'd tried to destroy. Her face was gaunt, defeated. The expensive athleisure wear had been replaced with a plain t-shirt. The perfect hair looked limp and lifeless. The woman who'd radiated authority and aggression that first day at my door now looked like a broken shell. Our eyes met for just a second. I raised my beer in a silent toast. She looked away and drove off. I never saw Linda Hartwell again. George came up beside me. "You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I'm great." "You know what you did right," George said quietly. "You did what none of us had the courage to do. You stood up to her when she was at her worst. You didn't back down, didn't give in, didn't let her win, and because of that, 150 families are free now. We're not living in fear anymore. We're not being robbed anymore. Our HOA is actually functioning the way it's supposed to, serving the community, not terrorizing it. I just wanted to be left alone on my own property," I said. "I know, but you did more than that. You showed everyone that tyrants only win when good people stay silent. You spoke up, you fought back. And you won. For all of us." We clinked beers and watched the sunset through the oak trees, listening to the creek babble in the background. The same creek Linda had wanted to control, the same property she'd threatened to seize. It was mine. It had always been mine. And now finally I could enjoy it in peace. 3 months later, my property renovations were completely finished. The deck was beautiful, 20 by 30 feet of red cedar wrapping around the back of the house with built-in planters and string lights overhead. Sarah had restored the original garden beds, and they were exploding with color roses, lavender daisies, and herbs. Mike had turned the garage into the ultimate gaming setup, and his friends from school were constantly asking to come over. Our 3 acres had become exactly what we dreamed of, a peaceful, beautiful home where we could do whatever we wanted without asking permission from anyone. The RV sat proudly in the driveway. The garden shed, properly permitted and totally legal, housed all our tools and equipment. The fence was stained exactly the color we chose. Everything Linda had tried to cite me for, everything she'd claimed was a violation, was still there, because none of it had ever been her business to begin with. But the most unexpected development was how my relationship with Meadowbrook Estates evolved. What started as a war zone had become a genuine community. The HOA residents freed from Linda's tyranny were actually pleasant to live near. They weren't the problem she had been, and once she was gone, people relaxed. They started talking to each other instead of reporting each other. They started helping neighbors instead of harassing them. George's new board transformed the HOA into what it should have always been, a simple organization that maintained common areas and handled essential services, not a miniature police state. Violations were handled with friendly reminders, not aggressive fines. Disputes were resolved through conversation, not litigation. It turned out that when you remove a tyrant from power, reasonable people can actually govern themselves just fine. My consulting work with the HOA continued. I helped them identify grant opportunities for infrastructure improvements. I reviewed their long-term capital planning. I even mediated a couple of neighbor disputes. Turns out my experience with Linda made me pretty good at de-escalating conflicts, and they paid me fairly for every hour of work with detailed invoices and proper contracts. The exact opposite of how Linda had operated. The drainage project using my creek access was completed in late summer. The new system worked perfectly, reducing flooding issues that had plagued the development for years. The retention pond was built by a reputable contractor who did excellent work at a fair price. My easement fee was reasonable and fully documented. Everyone benefited. It was proof that you could achieve community goals without corruption, coercion, or threats. I heard through the grapevine that Linda and Brad had moved 3 states away, living in a small apartment, both working service jobs to make ends meet while paying off their restitution. Brad had tried to start a new landscaping business there, but the word about the fraud had followed him and nobody would hire him. Linda was reportedly working retail. The woman who'd wielded HOA authority like a weapon now had none. The woman who'd lived in a beautiful house on the edge of a pristine development now lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a city where nobody knew or cared who she'd been. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering. I'm not that kind of person. But I did appreciate the justice of it. She'd built her entire identity on power and control, and when that was stripped away, there was nothing left. Meanwhile, I'd built my life on principle and hard work, and those things couldn't be taken from me. 1 year after I'd first moved in, 1 year after Linda had showed up at my door with her insane annexation demand, I threw a big anniversary party. I invited everyone who'd helped me through the ordeal. George and his wife, my attorney Jason, the police officers who dealt with Linda's fake complaints, the county inspector Dave, Rick and Patricia, and the new board members, my neighbors from both sides of the property line. Even Officer Chen, who'd arrested Linda that day she destroyed my construction materials. We grilled burgers and drank beer on my completed deck watching the sun set over the creek. People told stories about Linda's craziest moments, and now that she was gone, they could laugh about them. The time she tried to fine someone for having the wrong shade of white on their mailbox. The time she called the police because a kid was selling Girl Scout cookies without a vendor permit. The time she measured everyone's grass with a ruler to find violations. I have to ask, Jason said at one point. Did you ever expect it would go this far? I thought about it. Honestly, no. When she first showed up with that annexation nonsense, I figured one letter from my attorney would end it. I never imagined she'd escalate to criminal behavior. But once she did, I knew I couldn't back down. If I'd given in, she would have just moved on to the next person and done the same thing. Someone had to stop her. You saved this whole neighborhood, Patricia said quietly. She'd struggled with a lot of guilt about enabling Linda for so long. We were all afraid. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't know how to fight it. You showed us. The principle is simple, I said. Tyranny only succeeds when good people stay silent. Linda had power because everyone was too scared to challenge her. But power that's based on fear isn't real power, it's just bullying. And bullies fold the moment someone actually stands up to them. George raised his glass. To Tom Morrison, who came here looking for peace and ended up liberating an entire community. Everyone laughed and drank to that, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and the string lights clicked on, I felt genuinely content. This property, this life, this peace, it was exactly what I'd wanted when I bought the place. Freedom from HOA tyranny. The ability to make my own choices on my own land. The simple pleasure of enjoying a beautiful home without someone looking over my shoulder waiting to write a violation notice. Linda had tried to take that from me. She'd threatened, harassed, lied, and ultimately committed crimes trying to force me under her control. And she'd lost everything in the process, her position, her reputation, her home, her freedom, her future, all because she couldn't accept that some people were outside her jurisdiction, and that was okay. As the party wound down and people started heading home, George lingered on the deck. You know what the best part is, he said. Your property looks great. All those things Linda tried to cite you for, the RV, the shed, the fence, all of it, it looks perfectly fine. Better than fine. It adds character. She was never trying to protect property values or community standards. She was just addicted to control. Yeah, I agreed. The irony is, if she'd just left me alone, none of this would have happened. I would have been a quiet neighbor, minding my own business on my own property. She created the exact situation she claimed to be preventing. That's how it always works with people like her, George said. They create the drama they claim to be fighting against. I walked George out to his car, then returned to the deck. Sarah was cleaning up and Mike was inside gaming with his friends. I sat in one of the deck chairs and looked out at my property. The oak trees rustling in the evening breeze, the creek babbling over the rocks, the fireflies starting to appear in the grass. It was perfect. This was what I'd bought. This freedom, this peace, this simple right to live on my own land according to my own choices, without someone else's petty rules and manufactured drama. Linda had tried to take it from me with fake authority and escalating threats. But here I was 1 year later, sitting on my deck, living exactly the life I'd planned. And she was gone, destroyed by her own obsession with control. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well and refusing to be intimidated. Sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't require being aggressive or cruel, it just requires being firm, documenting everything and letting the system work. Linda had violated so many laws and crossed so many lines that she'd ultimately prosecuted herself. I just refused to be her victim and let the consequences play out. As I sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of my property and feeling the satisfaction of a battle won, I realized something important. I'd never wanted a war. I'd never wanted to take down an HOA president or liberate a community. I just wanted to be left alone. But when someone tries to take away your rights, your property, your peace, you have two choices. Submit and lose everything, or stand up and fight for what's yours. I chose to fight. And it turned out that fighting for yourself sometimes means fighting for everyone who's too afraid to fight for themselves. By defending my property, I'd freed an entire neighborhood. By refusing to be bullied, I'd shown others that bullies could be beaten. The property she'd tried to control was now a symbol of freedom from her overreach. The creek she'd wanted to exploit was now providing community benefits through fair legal agreements. The man she'd threatened to seize by force was now sitting peacefully on his deck, enjoying the exact life he'd always planned. That's the perfect peace, knowing that you stood your ground, fought for what was right, and won. Not through force or threats or illegal schemes, but through courage, principle, and the law. Linda Hartwell learned the hardest lesson of her life: authority means nothing if it's not legitimate. Power means nothing if it's not backed by law. And control means nothing if people are brave enough to say no. I never saw or heard from Linda again. Her chapter in my life was closed. But the lesson she taught me, the importance of standing up to tyrants no matter how scary they seem, that lesson stayed with me. And it's a lesson worth sharing. Because somewhere out there, someone else is dealing with their own Linda Hartwell. Some other HOA president or petty bureaucrat who thinks rules give them the right to terrorize people. And that person needs to know you don't have to submit. You don't have to be a victim. Document everything, know your rights, get good legal advice, and stand your ground. The bullies always seem invincible until the moment they're not. And that moment comes faster than you think.